Rapid, but we are talking about and are up there with those guys, the best players in the world. So is there really much separation between them? I think the notion of Vishy Anand being not this, as you said, he's had troubles traveling to events, and so we don't know what Ding Liren's capabilities are in Rapid at this given moment.
Yeah, we don't know, but from what we've seen, and that's all we can really base it on. Of course, Jan has had. I mean, he got silver medal in 2021 Rapid World Championship. I'm sure that we can think also of other uh, instances where he had phenomenal results, but Ding as well has plenty to look back on, to be confident about. So that's why I'm not sure. Like when I think about who I would feel more confident against in a rapid match, I would not feel like Ding is an easier opponent. I certainly wouldn't be like saying, "Oh, between Jan and Ding, give me Ding because he's going to be a much easier player to face." I mean,
Guys, and I think
in
we're seeing a repetition happen on the board. The players have been juggling around with the king and the rook, Fabi, and I think we might have a result soon.
we might see a repetition indeed.
And
Sorry, go
looks
on,
like
Fabi. I was just thinking that
Oh
rook
no,
a2
it's
on the board.
yeah, it could be a result which would be very big for the match. It would mean that we have a playoff on our hands. But Jan is getting up from the board, so I don't think we're seeing a repetition just yet. Let's not get too excited about this. So yeah, it might be a repetition, but Jan getting up is definitely a sign that he's still intending to play on a little bit.
Yeah,
this will
energy
be his
doesn't seem to
60th
be a
move.
question for Jan Robert.
No. He's the one who's ahead right now. He's a pawn to the good, and they're about to reach move 60. So Ding will spend a little bit of time, then get to his 60th move, gain more time on the clock and the increment. But yeah, the king did go to f7, so at least it won't be a repetition just yet. But both players know this will be a draw, and I am trying to wrap my head around. I know Tanya at some point is going to ask me, who's your favorite in the rapid? And I'm going to have to come up with an answer on the spot. I'm not sure. I mean, it's
You
really...
still got some time to think about
Weak, and you don't have a concrete approach here. You kind of just have to.
his attack.
I think king e2, bishop b5 check. He can essentially pre-move those decisions.
But it was Carlsen Nakamura, maybe even h5, a simple endgame at all.
Now up to Jan Nepomniachtchi. Forever. He's got nothing to lose. Now up to Jan.
I need to breathe.
King e3, it looks like Ding's breathing just fine. He's making all the right moves. We see the setups being one. Yeah.
He can always play a2 and take that h4 pawn. that's the thing. If he really wants to play 3 against 2, he can get the h pawn. There's no way for white to, like if he plays rook a1 and a2, white will keep the king on f3, and black can play rook h1, and white will have to capture, or black will be able to capture that h4 pawn, and we enter.
Gucci guilty bone.
And Parfum.
Ooh, baby, I feel so good.
In this video, I'll be covering the most advanced methods and techniques in all the WCA events, many of which are responsible for the incredible records that are being broken recently. First off, for 2x2 Pyraminx and Skube. 2x2 is solved pretty simply. First, you solve some side or some layer, and then you solve the rest of it in one algorithm. Pyraminx is solved pretty similarly. In this event, you make 1V, then you solve the rest in one algorithm as well. For Skube, it's very similar. First solve one layer, then after solving that, you just solve the rest in one algorithm as well. Now for all these events, you have to one-look them, obviously, so memorize your entire solution during inspection. But the most advanced method is another technique that you can use to get a lot more options with solving your first layer. It's pretty much building pseudo layers. Just for example, here would be one layer. Now, what if you did an R2? Now here you have a pseudo layer. Let me give a quick example of what I'm talking about. In this case, let's say I want to make a white layer. And I'm not too expert, but this white layer doesn't seem the greatest. However, I do see a block here and then a block here, which means with a one move setup, I have a pseudo layer. Now what I could do is solve the last layer like normal, like a CLL. The hard part about this method is that recognition is a bit more difficult. However, if you are able to recognize it, the solution of this case is super simple. You just do a soon here, and then R2 to finish off the solve. Now this is also a pretty big thing in Pyramix, where you build pseudo Vs. Here you can notice that with one move you can solve this blue-yellow block, and to continue a V you can do yellow, but these two pieces are in a V. Save that move towards the end, and instead do L4E right now.
The pilots of an Air Canada Boeing 767 find themselves in a desperate fight for survival high above the Canadian wilderness. Their massive jet has run out of fuel, and now they are running out of time. Will they be able to make it back to safety, or will they and their 61 passengers meet their bitter end in the coming minutes? This is the incredible story of Air Canada Flight 143. On the afternoon of July 23rd, 1983, 61 passengers and 8 crew boarded an Air Canada Boeing 767 at Montreal. They were bound for Edmonton, all the way over in the west of the country, with a brief stopover in Ottawa. Nobody knew it yet, but they were all about to become part of one of the most infamous events in the history of aviation. Many accounts of this incident focus on one particular mistake, but what most people don't know is that the story of Flight 143 involves a whole chain of unlikely and incredibly unfortunate events. This chain of errors would reveal critical flaws in Canada's aviation industry, which had implications for the entire world. That summer afternoon, Captain Robert Pearson arrived at Montreal Airport to take 61 passengers to Edmonton on one of Air Canada's brand new aircraft, a Boeing 767. At 48 years of age, he was a highly experienced pilot, with just over 15,000 hours of flying time. He had flown a wide variety of aircraft for Air Canada, and in his spare time, he also flew gliders. In many ways, his whole life was a preparation for the events of this day, although he was to have no idea about this as he pulled up at the airport for what seemed like a completely routine flight. When Pearson arrived at the airport car park that day, he bumped into the pilots who had just flown the plane into Montreal, who were on the way home from the airport. The pilots said their hellos, and the outgoing crew explained that the new plane was in perfect working order, apart from one small issue. There was a problem with the fuel gauges. Because of this problem, the fuel quantity in the plane's tanks needed to be checked manually, using what's known as a drip test. This involves pulling out a stick from the underside of each fuel tank, which indicates the depth of the fuel in centimeters. It may sound rudimentary, but it was a pretty reliable way of checking the amount of fuel on board. Captain Pearson was joined on this day by 36-year-old First Officer Maurice Quintal. Quintal was also very experienced, having logged over 7,000 hours total flying time. Before joining Air Canada, he had served in the Canadian Air Force. This experience in the Air Force would end up being vitally important on this flight, but for reasons you would never expect.
Nya Pucko Delight. Utan tillsatt socker. Fantastisk smak.
Vår mest avancerade eltandborste, Philips Sonicare Prestige. Philips.
The aircraft they were flying was a brand new Boeing 767. The 767 was Boeing's latest aircraft at the time, having just entered service less than a year previously. It was a marvel of engineering, with small television screens taking the place of many of the round dials found in older aircraft. Importantly, to have just 2 flight crew members, having automated away the position of flight engineer. This apparent advancement would be met with serious scrutiny as a direct result of the events which would unfold on this day. In the Boeing 767, the fuel quantity gauges are located on the overhead panel. Sensors in the fuel tanks tell them how much fuel there is on board. For redundancy, there are 2 channels which feed the gauges this information, Channel 1 and Channel 2. If one channel fails, the other channel is able to display the fuel quantity by itself. However, if there is just one channel working, as there was on this plane, the plane's fuel must also be checked manually, just to make sure that the readings from that remaining channel are accurate. While the pilots had been chatting in the car park, a ground engineer was in the cockpit, troubleshooting the faulty gauges. The previous engineer at the plane's last stopover had found the displays blank, and to solve this, he had pulled the circuit breaker for channel 2. This meant that just channel 1 was feeding data to the gauge, and it started working. Now, this ground engineer at Montreal wanted to see if he could get the system working by resetting it. He pushed in the circuit breaker for channel 2, and the displays went blank. He then did a bit bit more investigating before writing up the issue in the plane's tech log. Then, just before he got the chance to pull the circuit breaker for Channel 2 to bring the fuel gauges back to life, he got called out to do the fuel drip test. The fuel gauges remained blank. This was the first link in an incredibly unfortunate chain of mistakes, which would soon endanger everyone on board.
This fight will be legendary. The iconic F-16, MiG-29, and Tornado.
Meanwhile, Captain Pearson had arrived at the aircraft and began setting up the cockpit for the flight to Ottawa. As he did this, he noticed that the fuel gauges were blank. This made sense though, given his conversation with the outgoing crew a few minutes previously. He was expecting there to be a problem with the fuel gauges. Crucially, however, this was not the problem that the inbound crew had experienced. The fuel gauges had been working just fine for them. It was only the ground engineer's unfinished attempt to troubleshoot the gauges which had meant that they were now blank. But the captain didn't know this. He figured that this must have been the problem the other pilots had been referring to. Pearson figured that even though the plane was not allowed to fly with blank fuel gauges, Air Canada must have given it their blessing. This was common practice in the airline at the time, where planes were allowed to be dispatched even when they did not meet the requirements of the so-called minimum equipment list. But there was another thing which should have told the captain that the fuel gauges should in fact have been working. Before every flight, it is the captain's job to go through the aircraft's tech log to see what maintenance is being carried out on the plane and if it has any outstanding issues. In another incredibly unfortunate stroke of bad luck, when the captain opened the tech log, the entries of both engineers did nothing to disconfirm his belief that the plane had been flying with blank fuel gauges. The first entry, from when the plane was at its last stopover, read, "Fuel quantity indicator not working. Suspect processor unit at fault." And he gives the part number and then says that there's nothing left in stock. While the other tech log entry, from the ground engineer in Montreal, read, "Found fuel quantity indicator blank." In the case of the second entry, while the engineer did find the indicators blank, he was able to fix them. But the captain didn't know this. He was now firmly under the impression that the plane had been flying around without working fuel gauges, and that Air Canada must have given this its blessing. But all of this, while concerning, should not have been a major threat to the flight's safety. After all, the captain didn't need fuel gauges to know how much fuel was in his wings. He could simply tell the fuelers to put in the amount that he needed based on the flight plan, and then have them confirm that amount by using the drip test. But this is where things start to get really weird. While the captain was up in the cockpit going through the tech log, the ground engineers were under the wings, measuring the depth of fuel inside the tanks. They first needed to check how much fuel was already in the tanks, and then they would top them up with enough fuel for the plane to reach Edmonton. They found that each wing had a fuel depth of about 60 centimeters, which, according to their conversion charts, translated to about 7,600 litres in total. But Pearson didn't want the figures in litres, he needed them in kilograms. However, neither he nor the first officer
whether it is the line where white ends up defending against the h or the f passer, or this other idea with the king marching to b5, hitting the rook sliding all the way to e3. Again, it is a draw. We've got the eval bar telling us Ding Liren has no idea what the objective evaluation is. Every move hangs by a thread. There is still accuracy and work to be done by Ding. He is reaching out for a move. We see him there, but still unsure. So much at line, so much at stake here.
En önskestjärna. Skjut åt mig! Jag måste hitta önskestjärnan.
Snippa fram honom nu.
Allt jag känner här är katter.
Learning computer science on Brilliant.org means going beyond code to explore concepts like how a neural network thinks or how.
Seven.
Let's start, I think.
Doesn't change anything apparently.
On A8, but what is the benefit of being on A7?
Maybe he was avoiding this king c5, e6 king.
Yeah.
Nepo tries to advance the king to support the pawn.
Yeah.
Our pawn goes. You got to put the rook behind it, and we can continue.
Okay, so he plays
pushing it.
He plays king b6 though.
No, he played king b6. All right. Well, let's just take a look at what they're doing. It seems like they're coming in with some quick moves.
Yeah.
So what's the point after rook a8?
I don't know. Well, it's important not to blunder the rook. But the lucky thing for Jan is that like there's literally no way to blunder rook b8 check, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now he goes king c5.
Should we just go e6 and come back to that position, e6 and rook a6?
Well, given what Ding has been doing, he's
going to play rook a5 or something?
Yeah, rook a5 or something, yeah, exactly.
That's, a little strange. I mean, I do think this e6 line that you're showing us is like very simple and convincing.
Yeah, but he's probably a little bit worried like about losing the like 2 against 0 rook ending with f and h.
But they never get that, right? They never really get a true 2 pawns.
Yeah, but then let's say like if you really need to be 100% sure you don't get that, then you need to calculate really well. Like I would basically play 6 kind of instantly as well. I mean, I calculated, it seems to work, but even if I lose the h pawn, like even if I was wrong, well, I know it's a draw, and I have an idea on on how to make it sort of.
All right, he's reaching for the rook. Oh,
okay.
But he hasn't moved it yet. So it looks like he's not going to go for this e6 move.
Yeah, rook a6 is also kind of a logical follow-up to. But rook a6 now his pawn will be. So Jan is actually kind of trying to trick him, right? As if you go rook a6.
The pawn is not as far advanced.
Yeah, exactly. He plays rook a6 though. Okay. And now, so he's basically saying it is still a draw, which is probably fair, right? Yeah, I think it is fair.
You can just keep giving checks.
Yeah, and then king a1, we just wait. A2, we just wait, and there's no way forward, kind of. And yeah, let's say if they go rook b3, then we can. Yeah, I guess we just
go into the queen endgame.
Just in case, yeah. And okay, we're not losing this either. Okay. Well, what can I say? Very impressive defense from Mr. Ding for now.
Jan still has a lot of time to try to come up with something.
Yeah.
Should we?
But he's a man on a mission. Bit scary. Let's draw.
Yeah, it seems like he's on the. I mean, for sure he's nervous, right? We can't blame him. Even if it's a draw, even if you know it's a draw, you're still nervous because getting low on time, and obviously it's a sharp endgame, a lot of potential to go wrong. So yeah, but he seems to be holding it all together. That's how he's played the last few moves. Really, really excellent defense. I think this whole rook to a6 stuff, everything. Well, Jan continues to find some ideas. I don't know what those ideas will be, but he does seem to be finding some little tries here and there, move after move.
Yeah, it's one of these positions where Jan, he should keep trying. If this game ends in a draw, why offer a draw? Just play it out. And so for Ding here, I mean, he really has played impressively. For Jan, well, it's been a good game. He has never been worse. There was maybe that one moment very early on, what feels like a lifetime ago at this stage of the game, 71 moves in. But Fabi, it seems like Jan is exhausting his options. He also might be exhausting his opponent. Do you think that comes into play at all? I know he's just focusing on this game move by move, and I don't want to extrapolate. But who do you think is like, who wants this game to be dragged out? Who's trying to exhaust the other? Or do you think that it's really just neutral and both players are going to be exhausted no matter what?
I think it's potentially a bit more tiring for Ding because he's the one who has more stress riding on it. Jan is not risking, so he knows that he is not going to be losing
should be a draw.
And in a
Maybe
recent
e7 was inaccurate, and Ding should have played e4. But we saw this move knight g5. It was given a question mark